Good morning. My name is Jordan Tremaine, and welcome to the Perspectal Podcast, Episode 1. So, before we get started, since this is Episode 1, I thought that I would do a little bit of explaining about, why I'm doing this podcast, and hopefully it explains some things, and you keep listening till the end, and then, subscribe and all that jazz. But, Perspectal, it is a podcast where we discuss concepts from interesting points of view, and we do this to try and help people to lead better lives. My favorite example of this is looking at the concept of depression. So if a person has depression, but they are unaware of depression as a concept, like they've never heard of it, then they are much less likely to seek help and be able to explain and understand depression than if they were aware of depression as a concept. And in much the same way, I think that the more concepts that a person is exposed to and the more connections between concepts that a person can make, the more free and well-off that person can be to explain themselves and navigate through the world and understand things. So now we're going to go and talk about what this episode is really about, which is good vibes. I really like this topic, but I think before I get into the meat and potatoes of this topic, I'm going to preheat the oven on it. We're going to back up and not talk about good vibes. We're going to talk about vibes. And even before that, I got to go to the grocery store before I even preheat the oven. And we're going to back up even more and talk about vibrations. Disclaimer alert, the next little bit about vibrations is going to involve some words and some ideas that some people would call like science talk or something like that. And I'm not intending to throw a bunch of words at you and confuse you. This has like little to no math involved, and there's not a test at the end of this podcast. But I think that if we go through this little bit of physics kind of stuff, it will pay off in the end, and we will have like kind of a better idea of good vibes. So I'm going to start there, and I hope you bear with me. So anyways, the physics definition of the word vibration goes like this. A vibration is the oscillating, reciprocating, or other periodic motion of a rigid or elastic body or medium forced from a position or state of equilibrium. And basically that means vibration is when you take something and you shake it. And that's like it. You can, analyze it till the cows come home, but vibration is just shaking stuff. In terms of how we as humans interact with vibrations and waves, I am going to talk a little bit about vibrations and waves and use that term almost interchangeably, even though I understand there are some differences between the words. I am not going to acknowledge that during this podcast. We understand and deal with waves like in our own everyday experience through our senses. We have 5 senses, which are touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. And of those 5, 3 of them focus a lot on understanding waves. And so we're going to talk about those. I'm going to explain kind of how we understand those, and we're going to do this in terms of kind of some of the components of waves. And every wave, no matter what kind of wave it is or how you're perceiving it, it has 2 components that are constant, and these are frequency and amplitude. So frequency is a measure of how frequently something happens. So an anniversary has a 1-year frequency. It happens every year. My paycheck has a bi-monthly frequency. It happens twice a month. And so things can happen at a high frequency where they happen more often, or at a low frequency where they do not happen as often. But the idea is a frequency is something that happens regularly at a specific time interval. So like once a year or once a minute or something like that. And then amplitude is basically how intense something is. So is something happening in a very intense way, or is it happening in a very lax way? And to give kind of a more tangible idea of this frequency and amplitude stuff when talking about waves. I'm going to explain in terms of our senses. And so dealing with touch, if I was going to talk about the frequency of touch or the frequency of a vibration, I think that's the word we use a lot with like touch waves, they're vibrations. It is how often something is shaking. So am I shaking something hard? Like am I shaking a soda can so I can open it and like spray somebody with soda? Then I'm shaking it with a high frequency. Shake, 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 shake. Or am I rocking my baby to sleep? So I'm kind of shaking something, but very slowly and very gently. So like rock my baby back and forth. And maybe that's like once every 10 seconds as opposed to me shaking the soda can, which is like a couple of times every second. And then in terms of amplitude, it's the force or how hard you're shaking something. So again, with the soda can, I'm shaking it pretty hard. I'm using my strength. I'm like flexing and I'm like, I'm going to shake this can up. But with the baby, the amount of force I'm using is very small. I'm trying to be as gentle as I can. And you can have a high frequency but low amplitude wave. So if I was like shaking a soda can, but just, barely moving my hand like back and forth like a quarter of an inch, then maybe it's like a high frequency. I'm shaking it a lot, but very softly. And then, I could do something slow, but very hard. But that's touch waves or vibrations. And then in terms of sound waves, which is for hearing, if you change the frequency of a sound wave, what you're doing is changing the note. And I think that's just the full explanation of that. I don't really have to go into too much analogy for that, but if I'm singing three different notes, that's three different frequencies. And the higher the frequency, the higher the sound. The lower the frequency, the lower the sound. And then in terms of amplitude, for vibrations, it was like force was amplitude, and for sound waves, the amplitude of a sound wave is the volume. And so if I have a very high amplitude, then the volume is loud, and if I have a very low amplitude, then the volume is quiet. And then lastly, for sight or vision waves or light waves, however you want to describe it, the frequency of a light wave, this one I think is the most interesting, is the color. And so if you have low frequency light waves that are visible, we're only talking about visible light waves, then the color is more like a red or an orange. And as you get higher and higher frequencies, you move into like blues and violets. Those are very high frequency. And the rainbow actually is the kind of in order, the lowest frequency to the highest frequency of all the colors. And so it has red on one side and violet on the other side, and then the other colors kind of step up from lower frequency to higher frequency as you go along the rainbow. And then for amplitude, sight waves or light waves, however you want to call them, if they were to change in amplitude, they would change in brightness. And so you have these two components of a wave or vibration. And for frequency, frequency could be a change of color, it could be a change of note, or it could be a change of how fast you're shaking something. And then for amplitude, it could be a change of brightness, it could be a change of volume, or it could be a change of how hard you're shaking something. Okay, so that's basically all the science for today, I think, and we're going to move on into, preheating the oven, because we just went to the grocery store, got our science, and now we're going to preheat the oven so we can get to the main course. And now that we know a little bit about vibration, I think we can move into this term vibes, which I think is very different than vibrations, but also very, very similar. And I've heard certain phrases like good vibes only, or this place has a bad vibe. And they've always been very interesting to me, and I feel like I've always felt like they had a truth, like that's an accurate way of saying that, but why are people using those words? And I would have these thoughts before I kind of looked into vibrations and like the physics definition. But now that I know a very small amount of physics, my idea about vibes, I think, is connected to that. And to put it simply, nothing, no matter what it is, on the planet or in the universe or inside of you, is standing still. There's no such thing as something that's standing perfectly still. And to that, everything is moving. Even if you can't perceive it, everything is vibrating. And what's interesting is that depending on what it is, like what it's made out of, what shape it is, how dense it is, are there any air bubbles in it, it's vibrating at a very specific frequency, which is called a thing's natural frequency. So aluminum will have a different natural frequency than steel, and it'll have a different natural frequency than bone, and it'll have a different natural frequency than air. And this is like assuming that nothing else is forcing it to shake. It'll shake by itself, but at a very specific frequency. That's based on a couple of things, like its size. So a 2,000-ton block of steel will shake at maybe a different frequency than a 1-ounce piece of steel, and the shape has a lot to do with it. So you can have a steel tuning fork. You can have multiple steel tuning forks that all sound differently because they're all vibrating at different natural frequencies due to their mass and their shape differences. But the idea is that different things are vibrating at different constant specific frequencies as long as they don't break or bend or deform. And this is true for everything. This is true for my cup. It's true for the table that my cup is on. It's true for the room that the table is in. It's true for my eyeball. It's true for everything. And the reason I'm saying this is because if you think in terms of waves or notes, I think notes is the easiest way I've found to understand this concept, which is kind of why I got into the physics stuff, so I can bounce between these different analogies between like vibrations and sound waves and stuff like that. When you play different notes together, they can harmonize or they can be discordant or they can cancel each other out. Like a couple of different things can happen or a few different things can happen. And it really affects the experience. And when you have notes that play together and harmonize, it's good. And it sounds good and it makes you feel good, hopefully. And then when notes come together and they just don't sound good, then you're like, this is not good. Mm-mm. And in much the same way, objects produce natural frequencies that we can look at like notes, like each object in the room right now is playing a different note, and all the notes are coming together, and some are playing in high amplitude, like some are very loud, so some of the objects are bigger or more imposing, and some are very small and hard to notice, but they're still there. And whether or not things have a huge effect or a small effect, everything does have an effect. And they all come together to produce this kind of symphony or overall sound, and which is something we call a vibe. I think this is kind of the concept of feng shui or Zen. If I'm wrong on that, I would love to be corrected in a nice way. But the idea that everything is producing a vibe and it's coming together and it's making this overall vibe, and that vibe is something you're experiencing in real time, has a lot to do with how you experience a place. And sometimes there's a place that, for all intents and purposes, has a good vibe in terms of it works well with you. You like the sound of that place, the feel of that place, but there may be one or two things in that space that you do not vibe with, that are discordant with the sound or the vibe that you're putting out, because you're made of stuff too. You're made out of bone and muscle and eyeball and all those different things, and all of those things are vibrating, all of those things are working together, and you're producing this symphony yourself. You are this symphony, this vibe that's coming out, and it's interacting with all the vibes around you. It's interacting with the different vibes of different people, and it's interacting with the vibe outputs of all the different objects with natural frequencies. which includes living stuff too. Like, so bone does have a natural frequency, even though I'm kind of differentiating. It's everything is vibrating. So the idea of something like a space having a good vibe, or somebody saying good vibes only, I think is something that isn't just a bunch of like hippie stuff. It's like, when you think about it, and I don't know if there's something sensitive enough to do this, but you can kind of theoretically measure different things and produce spaces that have vibes that match with people or situations or environments. I think that's a better way to say that. And you can do the opposite. You can make environments that do not match with people. And so we have this idea where there's a space, and the space is producing a vibe, and the stuff inside of the space affects it. So you have a concert hall, and then the musicians you put in the stage and the music they're playing affects the sound in the concert hall. But what I think is a really interesting part is we have inanimate objects, like we have bricks, and we have pins, and we have, I don't know, shoes. But we have adamant objects like people and rabbits and squirrels. And while people are made out of materials that have natural frequencies, people have this ability to affect their natural frequency in real time, which has something to do with the overall vibe of an area or the mood of a place. I think that is how it's said a lot. And this comes in a couple of different ways, and I can explain a bunch of ways, but I'm not going to explain too many. I think I'm going to explain 3. And one is the shape of somebody. They can affect that. You can affect the density, and you can affect the shape. So in terms of the size, I don't think that was the word I used, but I'm going to go with that. In terms of the size of somebody, like somebody over time, usually, longer than a week or a few months, they can make choices and affect if they have a lot of muscle mass, or if they're fat, or if they have a clean digestive system or not. And people can make choices that affect these things, and they're kind of like long-term choices. In terms of shape, what I mean by that is not like how fat or skinny you are. What I mean is like the way that you conduct yourself, like the movements you make and your body language and your posture. This is a lot like how a trumpet player, like a jazz trumpet player, they can use something called a mute, and a mute is basically like a hat or a plunger or a hand or something, and they stick it in front of the bell, which is the part where the sound comes out of a trumpet, and they move the mute in very specific ways, and that changes kind of the shape of the trumpet for that second, and it produces a different sound, or it modulates the sound a little bit. And your posture or your body language or the way that you're shaped can affect the vibe you put out, much like tuning forks of different shapes and sizes, but the same material can have different sounds. And then lastly is density, which I think you can look at as kind of a component of the other two, but I'm bringing it out as something different because I think it's worth talking about differently. And the density, by what I mean is kind of like with a guitar string. So yeah, you have the same guitar string, but if you're tuning a guitar, you can like tighten or you can loosen that string and it'll change the sound because it's getting more and more tight or more and more loose. And it's that's kind of what I mean by density. And in this way, I think people can tense up their muscles, they can grit their teeth, or they can be very relaxed. And this has a lot to do with the vibe that a person is putting out, because a tensed muscle will vibrate at a different frequency than a relaxed muscle, much like the guitar string. And the reason I'm explaining this is because people put out this overall natural vibe, this kind of symphony that is the person, but they can change it. And they can do stuff to change it long term. They can do stuff to change it like in the medium term. Maybe with what they ate that day, because what you eat goes into your body and it sits there for a couple of hours and it has some frequency content. And they can do it minute to minute. So they can do it with their body language. They can do it with what did I say? With how they like tense up or how they relax. And there are a lot of different ways you can look at this, and I'm just picking a couple of ways to look at it. But in addition to kind of the practice of only keeping things around that kind of push the productivity of you in a space, so like having good zen, having a room that has good vibes, I think that's what I'm getting at. Also, the way you are in the moment affects the vibe of everything around you, because like you are one of the guitar players in the band, and if you're playing some bad stuff, it doesn't matter how good everybody else on stage is playing. The whole sounds terrible because you're not playing the right stuff. So you have a big effect on your ability to interact with the vibes around you, and you can have all the like the good vibes crystals, and you can have the bonsai trees and stuff, but like if you're bringing a bad mood, or if you're tensed up all the time, or if you're, I guess, not healthy and stuff, you're not helping yourself to experience this good vibes concept. But on the flip side, you have this ability to change. Like if you're in a place that's not so good for you, that doesn't vibe very well with you, that feels like it has a bad vibe, you have some freedom in real time to change the way that you are at that moment to affect the vibe and affect the harmony, and trying to turn the discord into something more harmonious. It may not be what you naturally lean to when you're not thinking, but you can actively change a situation's vibe by affecting it in the ways that you can do in real time. And other people can do this too. And sometimes it becomes kind of a competition between who can, I guess, control the room, or however you want to say it. So this vibes concept is very interesting to me, and I think it's like directly related to vibrations and sound waves. And you can, if you think about it like that, I think it gives kind of an interesting flavor to the idea, and it may give you the ability to kind of see things that, or perceive things that may not have been on your radar before, or that it may have been like subtle, or you may not have noticed that may be affecting you, or see other things that really do help you out, but you haven't been making an effort to have more of those things because it really, like, maybe it just didn't dawn on you or something like that. So hopefully this helps. I think this concept is really important for me, and when I'm thinking about it, it does kind of affect how I act and the kind of things I choose and the food I eat and the exercises I do and kind of all of that stuff. It's one of those like kind of things I keep on the back burner all the time. But yeah, that's the concept of good vibes from my mind. And if you have other concepts about it, and if you have other ideas or experiences, I'd love to hear about them. But I'm going to stop because it's been a little bit of time, and I don't want to kill your whole day. But thank you. This has been Perspectal, episode 1 on good vibes. And the whole point of this podcast, in addition to explaining concepts from interesting perspectives and trying to get people to have new concepts and connect concepts, is to inspire conversation. If this is something interesting and you think your friend Jack would benefit from him, tell him about it. Have a conversation with it. Poke your friend's brains about it. Talk to your mom. I think more people should talk to their moms. And get people together and talk about it. I think that's the whole point of this. And then you share more concepts and you build more ideas and you connect more things. So, yeah, this has been episode 1. Thank you guys for listening, and I will catch you on number 2.